indoctrination up in the New York area there. And then I went to Harvard for communications training. And then at the end of that, word came through that would be transferred to the University of Colorado in Boulder to take a course in the Russian language.
Ah.
So I went there. I was there about 6 months, studying 24 hours a day.
Now, that was your choice to study Russian, or was that...
That's where I was assigned. They did check with me,
Yeah,
saying they intended to send me there.
right.
So I went. And
And you knew no Russian,
no background whatsoever.
just a brand new language, new assignment,
Yeah.
total immersion training.
Yeah.
Okay, wow.
So I got to be pretty fluent in 6 months, spending all my waking hours
Right.
doing it. But it's amazing how that fluency disappears when you stop using a foreign language. I have had since grasps of Italian, and German, and French, as well as my German, my Russian, and I do have some language natural skills,
Obviously.
but it doesn't stick with you.
Okay.
Anyhow, when I finished that course, I was sent to Naval Intelligence in Washington, and they put me to work deciphering Russian communication codes.
Oh, wow.
And I did that for probably a year and a half in Naval Intelligence. And then they approached me to go abroad, either to Japan or to Germany, to participate in the war crimes trials which were being set up.
So who approached you? Who approached you?
The Bureau of Personnel of the United States Navy. And I said, well, why in the world this? It's true, I am a lawyer, but even then I don't believe I'd quite turned 30. This was all in my late 20s. And I had no strong trial experience. I'd done a variety of things in Washington, Philadelphia, and New York by that time. But I said, why me for this? And they said, well, we really want you to go to Nuremberg. And I said, well, I wouldn't go to Japan unless you forced me. So I said, but why me at Nuremberg? And they said, we searched their files, and we're looking for a young person with substantial, sophisticated legal experience who has a command of the Russian language. And they said, in our files, there's nobody else. So I said, what am I to do there? Practice law with the Russians? And they said, no, you're going to be a liaison officer to try to connect the Russian legal staff with the American legal staff. And since you're bilingual and you're a lawyer and you're in the Navy, we have the authority to send you. We hope you would enjoy going.
How did it work? I know the combat soldiers had to accumulate points and couldn't get out until they had a certain point level. Did you have a term that you were committed to?
I still had an unfinished term.
Okay.
And so what I said is, look, in 6 months, I'll have, speaking roughly, I'll have enough points to be released. I don't want to go over there and get deeply involved in stuff that it would be embarrassing for me to leave or difficult for me to leave, because I have a family, several children, and a law practice that I hope is still around, and I'm not looking to make a long-term commitment here. They said, we'll promise you at 6 months, we'll give you the option to return if you would. So on that basis, I went. I left in September of 45 and had the pleasurable experience of flying the ocean for the first time before there was any civilian flights across the ocean. I went in an Army plane and flew to the Azores and to Paris. And then I met a British officer in the Army, British Army, who had a Jeep and he was on his way to Nuremberg. So we agreed that he should take me along. I had this set of orders to travel any place in the world except the United States and to commandeer air traffic, air passage. So, and it was up to me to get there. They just gave me this and said, you go and get there. I'd never been abroad before. So after a week's pleasure in Paris, we headed for Frankfurt in his Jeep, and I checked in at the Nuremberg office there, the trials office. They had a small office in Frankfurt. And they did some telephoning and managed to let Nuremberg know that I was on my way. And then we drove on to Nuremberg and checked in at the Grand Hotel. And that became more or less my headquarters while I was there. And I came back in March, 6 months.
When you got to the Grand Hotel, who did you report to? Who was your...
I reported to, well, I'll say this. In Frankfurt, I forget the name of the fellow. A prominent name in the Nuremberg group, but for the moment it escapes me. He was a well-known trial lawyer from, well, let's not struggle with who that is. I'm just about to turn 87. And, my memory isn't what it used to be.
No, you're in very good shape. It's very, very impressive.
Well, at Nuremberg, it was suggested to me that I look up Telford Taylor and get some advice from him as to where to go from there, so to speak. So I found Telford Taylor at the offices in the Palace of Justice. And I had a nice visit with him, brief.
You didn't know him previously?
I didn't know him, and he didn't know me. I don't think either of us knew anything about each other.
Right.
So, of course, he was about 10 or 15 years older than I. He told me that the place to go was Colonel Story's office, who was really the administrative head of the American legal contingent there, and was more or less running administratively the American legal staff and personnel, of which there was a great many. And so he said he had gotten word I was coming down, but he didn't know in what connection. In other words, he knew nothing about me or why I was coming. Which struck me as rather absurd, because the real Bureau of Personnel in Washington was quite certain that they needed there a liaison officer. And wouldn't he know that? And that someone was coming?
Right. Obviously not a request he sent up the line.
No. And that gave me a little quick insight into Nuremberg. And I must say, it continued all while I was there. But I explained that to him, and he said, well, he ran through my legal history and came to understand how I had learned my Russian and what I had been doing since. And he said, well, in the main room here, the legal room, the legal offices, had a lot of individual officers in a great big central room with lots of desks in it where lawyers and others were working. And he said, we'll give you a desk there and put a sign on it, a liaison officer, and you just hang out there. And he said, I'll pass the word to our staff and to the Russian staff that we now have a liaison officer who will be available to lend any assistance he can.
Yeah.
And then he said, in the meantime, if you just, you'll probably find nothing going on for a while at your desk. But make a practice of circulating among all the people you see in this area, probably a total of a couple hundred at all levels, you know,
Yeah.
and find out what they're doing. And then when the Russians come with their problem, you'll be able to give them some help. And you'll be able to talk to them, find out what their problem is. You'll know whom to see, and you can introduce them to the right people. And you can participate if you want, and try to be helpful. So I thought that was a sensible set of instructions. But the only thing was that after 2 or 3 weeks, nobody had come to my desk. I'd made a lot of friends,
Right.
and I developed a buddy there who was in the Air Force, and he had a Jeep, and he had a military assignment, but he didn't seem to have much to do. It was a place where people were coming through, sort of cooling their heels for a while, and then going on to something else. You know, they were slowly working out who should stay and what they could do. And the trials hadn't opened yet.
Yes.
And so he had a lot of spare time. And
What was his name? Your friend, the Air Force guy?
his name was, he was on my mind a moment ago when I first thought of it.
He'll come back.
It may come back to me. But in any case, he was not a lawyer.
Okay.
And he wasn't engaged in the Nuremberg activity as a lawyer or as a staff person. He was still in the Army and doing something for the Army, but it wasn't very much. So it turned out he was a horseman, and I've been a fox hunter all my life, as a good many people are with a Maryland background. And he had a Jeep, so we took to going out into the Black Forest and finding estates, what appeared to be his personal estates. And we would pull in and talk to the personnel in charge.
Yeah.
And we would discover they had horses, and they had not enough personnel to keep their horses worked. So we would go and work their horses. And we got very friendly with a lot of Germans that way.
Yeah.
They were great guys. They had good horses. And we had the whole Black Forest to ride in, trails every place. So whatever time we would get, we would do that. But I tried to stay reasonably in touch with my desk in the Palace of Justice. But finally I realized it wasn't working and that I couldn't keep doing this and feel personally comfortable with behaving like that. So I looked up Story and I said, look, as far as I'm concerned, you'd be better off send me home. And I've enjoyed my visit, but I've done enough here in the way of visiting, and I'm ready to go back unless you have some reason to keep me. Because you're not going to need any liaison. I said, I've discovered these two legal staffs understand very well how to talk to each other. They go back and forth, and they have no trouble communicating. And they know who they are and where to go. I had one person come while I was on duty as liaison officer. It was a woman. She was a lawyer, a Russian woman. And she spoke to me in English and wanted to find certain documents. and I undertook to help her. And I did get the documents for her and saw that she got them. But
Was that unusual? Just as you close your eyes and you see the whole area where there's 200 American personnel, were there many women?
were they what?
Were there many women in the...
Oh, lots of women. Of course, a lot of secretaries, staff people. Not many women lawyers, but some.
Yeah.
And
Similarly, did you ever get a chance to see where the Russians were preparing their case? Were you ever invited over?
I never got to their offices. Now, I met Russian lawyers around the courtroom, and there would be times when they would have their legal staff in there and presenting evidence and so on, and there would be court breaks, and I would join the Russian group because I had some command of the language and got acquainted with some of the lawyers that way.
I'm getting ahead of the story. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. But so you were talking to Colonel Story.
I talked to him, and he said, give me some reference in Washington so I can just check on you as a lawyer. Somebody who knows your career there. I gave him the name of Arthur Kent, who at that time was a pretty well-known lawyer in Washington and had some pretty high legal offices there. I forget particularly which ones, but then had gone into private practice, and he was at a firm that knew me very well. In fact, I had started my practice with them when I got out of law school.
Did you know that Arthur Kent and Jackson had a relationship?
And I had reason to believe. Jackson had been chief counsel to what was then known as the Bureau of Internal Revenue.
Right.
And I think Kent had some connection with him at that time.
Right.
And I think I remembered his talking about Jackson. It was Truman to put Jackson on the Supreme Court. And I guess he was Chief Justice. Am I right on that?
Just an associate justice. Jackson was an associate justice.
Associate Justice, yes. Story said, I'll try that. And Story got in touch with Kent, Arthur Kent, who turned out knew Jackson extremely well.
They were very close.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right.
And he knew me completely as a lawyer, and he gave him quite a bill of goods. And so Story got back to me and said, we hear that we ought to have you as a lawyer.
Right.
And would you stay on and do some legal work? I said, well, it's interesting to me, and I've got to get these points. And you get points faster when you're abroad than when you're in the United States. So I said, I'll work my points out right here. And he formed a legal group, made me the head of a group of about 8 or 10 people, kind of a task force, which had several lawyers and secretaries for each, a translator, an interpreter, a person who could do research documents for us in foreign languages. A very nice little group, and I was the head of it. And they gave us assignments, and we formed a very active group that worked well together.
Is this still before the trial has started, or
The trial had not yet started.
Okay.
I think it was about the 1st of November that they tried, thereabouts. I got there in mid-September.
Right. Okay.
So they gave me relatively narrow things to focus on. I don't know that I was at first. I don't know that they wanted to me to get acquainted with the facilities there and how to use them, and they wanted to really get firsthand exposure to what I could do or seemed able to do. And then after a period, they said, we have assigned the subject of the American case on the persecution of the Jews to a colonel here. Again, my name should pop right in my mind, but he wants a group. Will be sort of his backup research group and trial memorandum group, and we've suggested to him that he take your group on for that purpose. But he said, I want you, me, to be head of the group and report directly to me, Colonel Story, because I also want to have a line on this fellow who is your senior in the military and has been here longer, who's going to be in charge of this and is going to present the evidence. So we worked that way, and we did a lot of research work, and I personally wrote the trial memos, and he appreciated them. So it all worked out pretty well.
Was that Tom Dodd?
No, it wasn't Tom Dodd. If we have a list, I didn't bring my own list.
I've got a list.
Of the, there's a list of the Jackson and the trial counsel. It has about 20 names on it.
Right.
Stories on it, and
Bryson's on it.
I should be on it. I understand that list is now engraved in bronze and permanently exhibited in the Palace of Justice.
I've heard that too.
I've seen a photograph of
Okay.
it. Assistant Trial Counsel. Yeah, Major Walsh. I should call him a colonel. He was then a major. William F. Walsh. And running down this, you have Jackson at the top. I knew him. I told you about the story. I just had a brief exposure to Tom Dodd. I knew who Sidney Alderman was, the guy who was in Frankfurt in their office when I made my way to Nuremberg.
Gotcha. Okay, good.
And it was he who told me, and I see Taylor is listed right under him, so that's why he sent me to Telford. I dare say Telford was reporting to Alderman. I'm not positive on that. And then I knew who Eamon was, but I didn't do any work with him. I never knew Albrecht. I don't remember Colonel Wheeler. Bill Baldwin I remember. Brockhart I knew casually. I don't remember Donovan or Wallace. I've told you about Major Walsh, for whom I did that work. Farr I don't remember. Sam Harris I remember. Drexel Sprecher is still here in Washington, and he has kept in touch with me through the years. So I feel I know him pretty well. Whitney Harris, of course, I remember. Lambert isn't just a name. Atherton is just a name. There's my name. There's Bernie Meltzer. I knew him better. I remember seeing Kempner around, but I didn't work with him. I remember Walter Brudnow, although I didn't work with him. I don't remember Hartley Murray. I don't remember Charles Burdell. That covers.
Okay.
When you flip the page and you look at the Russian staff, did your paths ever cross any of them? Maybe on the next page.
Maybe on the next case, yeah. Here we are, right here. The Russians. Of course, there was Rudenko, who is well known. And
did you ever meet Rodenko?
I probably did shake hands, you know.
Yeah.
But I never worked with him. I got to know him personally. And some of these names just seem a little familiar. But I can't say that I actually worked with them.
I think the page stopped.
The next page, it ends here.
Yeah.
I look These are,
Yeah, then it goes to the French. That's right. Okay.
no, they're French.
Yeah, you knew Russian, but not French. Probably didn't have French down very well, the French language. Well, this is probably a good time. I'll get you a little bit off the chronology here. Can you talk about some of these personalities you've just mentioned? Talk to me about Robert Jackson.
Well,
Impressions of him.
actually, I'll just keep going where I was.
Sure.
So
Okay, that's fine.
when Walsh came to the time, he had to prepare himself and go into the court and present his evidence, and he had absorbed all my trial memos, and he felt himself well prepared. My job was over there, and I reported back to Story, and he at that time he knew a lot more about me, and he went out of his way to introduce me to Jackson. And I had seen Jackson in large gatherings, you know. He was always up front and in charge at times, but I had no personal contact with him. And I don't think I was expected to push myself forward in order to make those contacts. I just took them as they came.
Right.
And I really enjoyed the youngsters, my own age. But I was taken up to Jackson, and I was introduced to him, and he immediately knew my name, and he spoke of Arthur Kent. And
that was a magic connection.
Yes.
You had the right reference.
so we had a substantial talk, considering the fact there were an awful lot of people there, and he had to be responsive to everybody, and I enjoyed that and appreciated it. I must say that after that, I had little or no contact with him. It always came back to me through Story. Whatever had to come back to me from his office or from him. And so I had a limited but a memorable personal exposure to him, which I've described. I saw him later after I was back in Washington, and he was back in Washington. He was on the bench, and we had a good, we sat down and sort of had a good talk back about Nuremberg and so on.
Do you remember what he said? What was his, did he look back on Nuremberg kindly? Was it a...
I thought so.
Yeah.
I thought so. I think he thought it was quite an experience, and it didn't do him any harm in getting him ready for his further work as an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States.
Was that at the court where you sat down with him later? Did you make
No, it was in an
call?
office.
Oh, in an office.
He was in that office to see. In fact, he was in Arthur Kent's office.
Okay.
And I heard that he was there, and I walked down the hall.
Good for you.
And then we took a room and sat and talked.
And what law firm was that?
That was, oh Lord, it was a law firm of about a dozen lawyers with offices in Washington and in New York, and at some point in there in California. And Arthur Kent had become head of the California office, and Alvord. The firm was it doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
And it hasn't existed for a long time. It split up when Alvord died. But there were two Alvords, Alvord and Alvord. And the father, the elder one, wasn't very active anymore. But Ellsworth Alvord, that would have been junior, had been chief counsel to the United States Treasury. And then he had gone into financial legal work and opened this office, including a lot of tax work. And one of my sponsors at my law school, Columbia Law School, had introduced me to Ellsworth, Alvord, because I wanted to be down in the Baltimore, Washington area, which was my home area. And so he employed me. That was my first legal job when I got out of law school, which would have been in June of 38.
Mm-hmm.
So you were trying to get from me whatever comments I could give you that I got from Jackson. I guess there was nothing startling that I remember. I mean, it was more or less what you would have expected, I believe. He talked some about his experience at the Bureau of Internal Revenue, because at that time I was sort of specializing in tax work. And so we had something in common there. And so we talked about his experience in the Treasury Department. And we didn't talk particularly about what he was doing. I didn't know what I could ask and shouldn't ask on a bench, but I let him say whatever he wished to say about his work on the bench. And he did make this comment that he regarded the Nuremberg experience as very useful to him in preparing me for his further career, preparing him for his further career on the bench back in Washington. He was, did you know him personally?
I did not know.
Neither of you. He was a middle height, fairly substantial person. I mean, I wouldn't say he was plump, but there was a lot to him. And he had a very pleasant smile and an ability to be genial immediately with a stranger. And at least he went to that trouble with me. He had some reason for wanting to talk to me. When he found I was there, I had already come and gone at Nuremberg, and he knew about me there. So I found him very pleasant and genial. And I think he had that, and I found him that way in my brief contact at Nuremberg with him once or twice. But that was his reputation in Nuremberg. In Nuremberg, he was, everybody liked him. He was the kind of a leader and a boss that people wanted. So he was successful there, in my opinion. And I never heard bad criticisms of him when I was there from anybody.
Yeah.
I came to know a little later after I got there that the head of the army in that military district was General Gill. It's a name you may have encountered. He was in very close touch with all the top guys, including Jackson and the council for the British and French and the Russian council and other administrative people and army people. Well, it turned out that he knew all about me, not until I got there. He had nothing to do with my coming. But somehow my name came to him and he recognized it, because he was a graduate of, and for a long time the chairman of the board of a small college in Westminster where we live, Western Maryland College.
Right.
And he was crazy about Western Maryland.
Right.
And it had a fabulous football team that he brought there. And so on. We had in my class 2 All-Americans.
My God.
And one of them was the captain of the East team who played in the East-West game.
Yep.
I mean, it was unbelievable. He was the quarterback. So this General Gill, yes, was very glad to look me up when Jackson mentioned me to him. And so Gill sent for me and I went to see him. He turned out to be a good person for me to know. And when I got ready to go back, I went to see him. And he said, I've got some documents that I have to be taken to believe it or not, the Navy Bureau of Personnel. And
Where did it all start?
they have to be carried, especially, and I'll put them in your possession, and you're responsible for them, with orders to deliver them to the Bureau of Naval Personnel.
Well, hell be darned.
And he said, while you're there, you just speak to them about getting a release, and I will have sent the word.
Powerful guy.
And it worked out perfectly.
Yeah.
When I got there, I was 2 points short out of about 46 points he needed, and they waived the 2 points and let me go. But how did I divert there? So I knew him, and the younger lawyers who worked in my group, several, I forgot their names, and they weren't particularly prominent, but they were good working lawyers to have on a staff when you're trying to do research, organize documents, and produce something useful to a trial lawyer. And I had a good close relationship with them, and there were a group of young women there who were staff people, mostly secretaries, and we got to know some of them. And
Now, when you had that initial conversation with Jackson in his office at Nuremberg,
yeah,
did he get into the substance of what you've been doing, the evidence, or was it Arthur Kent and that?
I never had any discussion of legal substance
Okay.
personally with Bob Jackson.
Okay.
It just wasn't that kind of
Right,
discussion.
there were
It was sort of generally, what am I doing, what are you doing?
Yeah.
But not talking the substance or the procedure of the law, so to speak.
Right. But that was in his working office in the Palace of Justice where you got your conversation with him.
Yeah, or some group there. I didn't go to his office and sit down and work on a case with him.
Right.
But after I finished the work that I was doing for Walsh, and they were sort of filling in for the time being, it got to be a point where Jackson realized he was going to have to go to Washington in connection with the court to do something
Right.
at a certain time, and it coincided with the time when the United States was expected to open its case against Homer Schacht. And Jackson had insisted that he was going to open that case because he was the person who really insisted that Schacht be indicted. And the British opposed it, and the French opposed it. And Schacht had good friends in the banking world, in England, and in France, at a time when he was the chief financial officer for Germany. And Jackson knew the things he had been involved in and felt that he wanted a civilian leader, not a strong party man, among the defendants if possible, because he wanted to demonstrate that there were an awful lot of people who could have done something about this conspiracy that just willingly lived with it. And he thought here was a good example of that. And there was always a dispute whether Schacht had really been a member of the Nazi Party. But we had evidence that he had, but he always denied it, and there were ways to dispute it. He wasn't terribly active in the administration of it at any time. He was terribly busy with all the financial system of Germany, but he was guiding it all in accordance with where the Nazis were trying to take Germany. And he was coming up with the money for the war. And So Jackson wanted to have him indicted, and you needed three. I think you needed 3 of the 4 judges to make the indictment stick, as well as conviction, I guess. Well, in any case, the Russians sided with Jackson, and the 2 of them, I think, managed to persuade either the French or the British to approve the indictment of Schacht. I think it was the French, and I think that Schacht had his strong friends, banking friends in London. But in any case, Jackson wanted to make the opening statement of the case against, that is the American case, against Schacht. And I think we also opened the whole case against Schacht, and that the other countries, Russia and France and England, came along after our case was finished. And I by no means had charge of and handled the whole case that was brought against Schacht. I prepared for and made the opening statement at Jackson's suggestion, because he found he couldn't be there, and he wanted to select somebody. Why he had selected me, I will never know. But there were plenty of people around that were more senior than I and more experienced trial lawyers. But it was his decision.
What did you think? He comes up to you and says, or they come up to you and say, "You've got the job."
He didn't come to me. He didn't tell me about it.
Yeah.
Colonel Story came to me. He said, "We've been looking for something for you to do, and we've got something." And he said, "You got enough time to do the preparatory work, and then you would open the case, give the opening statement before the court in the case of Homer Schacht." And he said, "Robert Jackson has directed this, and we assume you will do it."
Now, how much prep time does that leave you before you're actually at the lectern?
I think my appearance on this case before the court was in early January. I would say around the 10th of January.
Right, that's about right. Yeah.
In 46.
Right.
And I would say that I began preparation the 1st of December.
Okay.
And I remember there was a great celebration at Christmas. Everybody took a holiday. They had various holiday places to go.
Right.
And everything, everybody stopped and took a rest. But I stayed on.
Did you have your...
And I was almost had the place to myself.
So you didn't have your task force?
No,
anybody
I
assisting
wasn't
you?
doing it with the task force.
Right, this was a solo
It
project.
was a solo job.
Okay.
And the task force was dissolved at that point when I took it on. So a lot of work had been done in preparation. I mean, you know, the case had been worked on for fully a year before it opened. And there, you have that list again.
Oh, yeah, here we go.
The fella, I don't think he left, and I would have recognized his name immediately if he'd been listed here. I don't catch it. He became a judge in New York, a federal judge. He was a very well-known lawyer, trial lawyer.
Murray Gurfein?
Murray Gurfein.
Okay.
Yeah, that was Murray Gurfein. Murray Gurfein had had the case assigned to him before he left. And he was just about to leave when I got my assignment. And he turned over me all his personal files on the preparation of the Schacht case, which you can imagine was very, very useful.
Oh, yeah.
But there was still a lot of work to be done. and there was nothing in the way of the preparation of any opening statement that I could have well used. But he left and I took over. And I worked very hard from whatever the date was when I started until we reached the opening day.
Now, is anybody really supervising you?
No.
How do they know when you get to the podium that, in fact, you've done it right?
If it wasn't a soul.
Okay.
I would have thought that Colonel Story, who was a trial lawyer and the head of the legal department there, I would have thought that he would have called me in and said, "Now, Brady, give me a rundown what you're going to do."
Right.
But he didn't. And there were other busy trial lawyers there all the time. Telford Taylor was one. And there wasn't one of them that approached me, and nobody told me to approach anybody. And so I kept it simple. And I just got my, of course I heard opening statements before, both in Washington and there. And I knew what an opening statement was. I knew what it was supposed to try to accomplish. And I set out to do that. And it turned out that my statement had me there active. I opened first thing in the morning on the first day, and except for the breaks, I had the courtroom to myself all the first day, as I recall it. And then I wasn't finished. So when they opened the next morning, I resumed and went on till the noon break. So I had a day and a half in the courtroom.
What a thrill.
The record will show for itself, and you've probably seen it, or at least you have it available.
Right.
And
I've got my 42 volumes of the blue
right,
set.
I have a set of that.
Right.
And and I was asked some questions.
Right, that's right.
And I think I handled them the right way. And finally I closed down. I put in, I don't know, 60 or 70 documents in evidence. I carefully identified each, and I think got along well with the court on occasionally there would be an objection, and I would let counsel for Schacht object, and when he finished, I just would resume.
Right.
I
never bothered to argue the issue with him, and the court didn't stop me.
Right.
So that was my way of handling my opponent.
Okay.
And it worked.
Right. Do you remember, was Jackson back to watch you?
No, he was not back.
Okay.
And I finished, and at that point, the case was, they went on to another case that had already been scheduled. They had a tough schedule there, and a long schedule. So there was going to be a break before that case would be resumed. And I had done what I had been asked to do. And I felt that everybody was quite pleased with what I had done. And word came back to me through General Gill, that Jeffrey Lawrence, the presiding justice, I'm right on the name, am I not?
Right, exactly.
He was at dinner with I just mentioned his name.
Lawrence.
Hmm?
Lawrence. Lord Lawrence, Justice Lawrence, or with Gill?
Gill.
Okay.
I was trying to think of Gill's name again.
Okay.
Gill asked me to stop by when I finished, I mean the next day or so, and he said that he had had dinner that evening with Jeffrey Lawrence, and that he was going around talking about, couldn't stop talking about Brady Bryson.
Wow.
He thought what I had done was a terrific job. And he even said, sort of confidentially, I mean, I wouldn't want this to be quoted, I'm not sure he said it, but Gil gave me the impression that Lawrence was saying it's the best I've heard so far in this trial. Well, I don't want to be, accused of claiming that compliment when I'm not that certain of it.
Well, it's hearsay, but from a direct witness, it's a nice compliment.
Anyhow, I knew I had been well complimented.
Right.
And that was recorded later, I think, in the big book, the one that our friend here,
Sprecher?
Sprecher.
In Drexel.
I think Sprecher says
Right.
in there, he has a sentence or two saying that my presentation
Yes.
received high compliments from the Chief Justice or something like that.
It's in that right there, in that book there.
Hmm?
It's in that book right there.
It is, yeah. Well, anyhow, I came away feeling that nobody had any negative criticism of what I had done at any level that I could find out, and I was very pleased.
Well, I can add I can underscore this. We had Bernie Meltzer, who did the case right after yours.
Is that right?
And Bernie Meltzer talked about you and how the staff reacted so positively towards a very difficult case and how well you presented a very difficult case. And
Yeah.
he didn't know we were coming to talk to you. So
Yeah. I think that was going on through the whole group. Not too many were saying it to me because I wasn't that close. I mean, it was a place where I was there a limited period of time. I was always working very hard except for the first 2 weeks. And there wasn't a lot of social life after I really began to do legal work.
You weren't living in a group house with a bunch of other guys.
No, I was a low-grade naval officer, and they assigned me to a dormitory with Army, what do you call the sergeant level? They're officers, but there's a name for they're people not above sergeant, so to speak.
Right, NCOs.
And
NCOs?
I guess so, yeah.
Okay.
I was living with a group of them in a dormitory, but I got away with something that somebody tipped me off. When I first came there, I had no assignment. So I checked in at the hotel, and they gave me a room and bath of the hotel, and the Palace Hotel. And then I went to the military office to formally check in that I was reporting for duty. And there they gave me my living quarter assignment.
how many there?
And it was in this dormitory.
Okay.
I never checked out of it.
So you had both places?
I never checked out of the Palace, the Grand Palace Hotel. And I had that room all the while. Now, I mostly slept in the dormitory. I didn't want to be sort of caught making an abuse of the quarters. I think I was prepared to pretend I went there to work when I need privacy and quiet, or to see people, or I needed to confer with them in a quiet place. And it was anyhow, I had it. So I didn't live too badly.
Good for you.
And I patted myself on the back for being resourceful.
Absolutely. Now, what happened after you've done your opening of the Schacht case?
Then after a day or two, I went back. I went to Story's office, and I said, I think I've done what I was assigned to do. And I don't know whether you know it, but I believe if approached, the military would reassign me to Washington at this time. And I really think I've done all I can do here, and I think I'm entitled to be considered because I'm on the verge of having enough points, and I've reached a breaking point in my work here.
Right.
So he was very good about it, and he said, go see General Gill. He's in charge of that. I went to see General Gill, and I've told you
Right.
uh, what happened there. He immediately gave me orders and to travel, and orders to go to Washington and to deliver these documents. And so I went to London. I stayed there a week, 10 days, sort of just, getting acquainted with.
Did you have any part of you that wanted to stay to sort of see the rest of it?
Well,
to be there through the verdict, any of that?
I had to make a choice, and it was a difficult choice because I could see what was going on in Nuremberg, and I found it very interesting. I felt I really had adjusted to it and succeeded thus far, and I knew there was a lot more work to be done. I knew they needed personnel. I knew they thought I was useful to them. So it wasn't easy for me to turn my back on it.
Right.
But I had very strong personal need to get back and get out of the service.
Right.
I had a wife and 4 children, and
Oh, you had 4 kids
I
already?
had 3 kids then.
Kids, okay. Wow.
And our 4th was born later in 1950.
Gotta ask, how was your wife's sense of humor while you were gone for this period of time in Nuremberg?
Where was she?
Yeah, how was her sense of humor?
Sense of humor?
Yeah.
Well, I tried to keep in touch, and she approved of my going, and she thought I should. We didn't disagree on this. I consulted her when the opportunity arose, and she thought I should take it. She helped me decide to go, and I had made a commitment to her that I would try to keep it on a basis where, as soon as I had enough points to get out, that they would release me if I could get that.
Right.
And I did get those commitments, but they were official commitments. They were understanding
Right.
that I arrived at with the Bureau of Personnel, as I was
It
talking.
sounds like you had the good luck to have people notice and appreciate you on the front end, the Arthur Kent connection, Jackson story,
Right.
that gets you some plum assignments.
That's true.
And sort of at the closing end, the General Gill connection helps you get home.
It helped me to get out.
Right,
Exactly.
right, okay.
Exactly. And so I went to see Story and had that conversation with him, and he suggested that I go see General Gill. I didn't tell him how well I knew it.
Right. The fix was in.
And Gill fixed me up, and I made my way home, and having a very nice 10 days or so in London as a holiday. So I managed on the whole trip to see Paris, Frankfurt, Nuremberg, where I was there quite a while and saw quite a bit of it, and London. It was after I got to Nuremberg. Well, it was November the 9th.
Right.
I would say up to that time I had never had any contact with Jackson.
Right, right.
Other than perhaps at a huge cocktail party where he was on a receiving line,
Right.
and I would shake hands, and
Right.
he would have no reason to remember my name.
But this is probably part of the reason why he knew your name.
Right.
Once you got into his office,
Yes.
the whole thing clicked.
I'd forgotten this,
Right.
but I did my duty, and I probably sensed there's nothing wrong in letting him know that I'm there and who I am.
Sure.
Absolutely. I would have done it.
Absolutely. No, that's absolutely right.
As you reflect back, as you were leaving Nuremberg, was there an exit interview at all? And you had these documents, you had some impressions. Did anybody sit down and say, Brady, as you're leaving, what's your thoughts about what we should do, or any advice, seeking any advice from you?
No, as a matter of fact, it wasn't, I don't know whether I was, for some reason, made the personal decision, or I had been sort of suggested to or instructed not to really talk about the fact that I was leaving for good. I went there to all intents and purposes on a legal mission at the direction of General Gill, for something he needed to have done in Washington. I was under his authority. He assigned me to do this. And that was my next assignment. Whether I might come back or whether any further arrangement had been made was really not talked about.
You didn't have a going away party?
No, I didn't.
Yeah.
I mean, I said goodbye to the people I was immediately around, and because I knew I was leaving Nuremberg, I didn't know whether I'd be back, and neither did they, so to speak. I was pretty certain that they wouldn't send me back, that they would release me when I got there. I didn't actually know that. And if they hadn't released me, I would have come back. I think my orders contemplated that I would come back to Nuremberg and report what I had done to General Gill. But the Bureau of Personnel had superior charge of me. I was one of their personnel and had been lent to the Army. And if they wanted to release me, that would cancel out any instruction of an official nature that Gill may have given me. I can't remember that detail too well. I'm guessing what it probably was.
What was the morale like? Here you are, it's 3 or 4 months into the trial. The trial seems to be taking a methodical time period. It doesn't seem to be real quick end in sight. What was the morale among the lawyers and the staff? Did you get a sense then?
Well, everybody that I was exposed to was working very hard.
Right.
There's no question about that. And in fact, they were very cheerful. They'd just done this Christmas party that I skipped in order to get ready to do my job. And they came from back. I think they had a very good time. They went down to that mountain top where Hitler used to go.
Right,
Berchtesgaden.
What's the name of it?
Berchtesgaden?
Berchtesgaden, yes. And
they went skiing
and that
sleigh
sort of
riding.
thing. And now I'll amend my story a little bit. I went down with them, but with the understanding, whoever was in charge of the group, to leave me out of all social things. And I had all my papers with me, and I was going to take advantage of the opportunity to be in a private room alone and to do all the work I felt I had to do.
Right.
So I did occasionally see a few of them at dinner, or I might have gone to dinner with a group or some other group there, and I could tell the morale was super down there.
Yeah.
They were having a wonderful time.
Yeah.
And I came back and resumed what I had been doing. I think if there was a deep-seated downbeat morale going on, I would have heard about it.
Right.
And I didn't hear about it. Possibly I just didn't talk to enough people in that vein,
Was there a sense of history while you were doing this?
Was that what?
Was there a sense of history while you were involved in the process?
I didn't have the sense when I went there. I didn't know anything about Nuremberg. A lot of people there had been months and months in London working, preparing all this and so on. I had no hand in the origin, in the idea, in the development of it, in the preliminary work that was done in England and elsewhere. Like Drex Spreckle was there. In fact, he stayed on even a couple of years afterwards. I was a Johnny-come-lately, because most everybody I ran into had been there, or had been in London. And I was a newcomer. And so I didn't spend a lot of time just, shooting the bull, so to speak, with the other lawyers at a personal level. The guy I knew best wasn't even a lawyer. He was this young guy, about my age, and he was hanging around. A lot of people came to Nuremberg knowing they would have nothing to do but stay there for a while.
Sure.
They just had flexible orders.
Right.
And they came, stayed as long as they wanted, and they would go. And they were going through. My friend seemed to stay on. He was there the day I opened the case. He was still there when I left. But that was the level at which I had personal relationships. Not too much with the legal staff, although I recognize Bernie Meltzer, of course, when you reminded me that he followed me in the courtroom. I remember it. I knew him perfectly well at that time. I don't know if I've ever seen him since. And I had Telford Taylor was there, sitting at the U.S. Trial Counsel's desk, and also somebody else. And they generally were considered more experienced, older trial lawyers. And when they had a young trial lawyer performing there, they wanted to know that he wanted him to know he was backed up. And if a situation arose where they didn't know quite what was the best way to handle it, they were available for consultation. But at no point did I have any need to do that. And I remember no discussion with Telford about that whole experience, although he sat there and listened to the whole thing. I did come to know him on a first-name basis after I got back to the States on some matter where we had some legal connection, and one of us looked the other up, and for the first time really got acquainted.
Yeah.
I had been introduced to him when I first reported there, but that's the last contact that I remember with him at Nuremberg, other than his sitting in the room while I was giving my opening statement, that is, sitting there as a lawyer.
Did your paths cross with Bill Jackson?
Bill Jackson was a circulator, and yes, I at times would occasionally have dinner with a small group that lived together. There were a number of small groups that lived together, had their quarters and meals together, and they all felt that I should be there. But I'd said to them, don't say anything, but I'm in the Grand Hotel. But they would occasionally invite me, saying, you should have been here, and so come on to dinner. And I remember going deer hunting as some moment's relaxation. I think this was before I got too busy, when I was just briefly there. My horse friend, during that period we were exploring the countryside, and he turned out to be a deer hunter. I had never hunted deer in my life and had never fired a rifle. And that group that Jackson was in organized a deer hunt, invited me to go, provided me with a rifle. And I went, and believe it or not, there were about 6 or 8 of us that went deer hunting. Out there quite a long time, with a German guide, you know. And believe it or not, I was the only one to shoot a deer. The only time we ever did it, I didn't particularly enjoy it. I wouldn't want to do it again.
Right.
And I live on a farm now, and deer come there, wonderful.
Right.
And during the deer season, I have to let my friends hunt there.
Yeah.
But I go someplace else.
Right, right. For your own safety, probably. I don't know if your deer population down here has exploded the way it has up in New Jersey and New York. But yeah.
So then they had a deer dinner. I supplied the deer, and they had a party and brought in a few guests in addition. And young Bill Jackson was there. And I was exposed to him in a perfectly social way there, so that whenever we passed each other, I could say, hi, Bill, and he'd say, how's it going, Brady? And we'd go right by, you know. He was always on some mission. He was very busy administratively. He was always working on some administrative problem. I don't think he was particularly busy on the legal side.
Yeah.
But you would know that better when I actually got into it. Maybe even after I left. I don't know.
How about Elsie Douglas? Did your paths ever cross with Elsie Douglas, Bob Jackson's secretary?
Was it Elsie?
Elsie, yeah.
Let me see. She was in touch with me, maybe just thanking me for that note that you showed me.
Yeah.
I had some contact with her.
Yeah.
Maybe she stopped to see me, or maybe I heard she would like to see me, and I dropped in to see her, and we had a chat, and I remember having a talk. I don't remember what we talked about,
Right.
but I do remember as her person. And she may have told Jackson that I came in.
Right.
He may have known that I stopped.
Did you see the movie on Nuremberg, the one that was last year on TNT? Did you happen to see that 4-hour?
I knew about it, but something prevented me from seeing it, so I did not see it. No, I didn't see it. I would surely remember that I had seen it.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, yeah, sure.
I had seen it.
What's the legacy of Nuremberg? When you sit back, here you are at age 87, reflecting on your days at Nuremberg. What's the legacy of this whole thing? What's the legacy?
The legacy?
Yeah.
Well, I tell you that my own conception of Nuremberg, to the extent that I gave some thought, which I did after I got working there seriously, and went away with, some feeling about what I had been a part of. And my strongest feeling about Nuremberg, that its real value was to make to the extent humanly possible, so to speak, make a permanent written record of that terrible period of history. Mm-hmm. And that it was the history that was valuable. After all, the war was over.
Right.
There wasn't a war to fight. And in a formal sense, we were trying to convict and punish a number of individuals, but as people, they really didn't mean anything to us. I felt it was a whole lot more important that the record be made rather than whether or not the person was convicted and whether he was hanged or put in prison for life or where he might be right now. That personal side of it, I thought, was given the primary play in the press. But I thought the really important and valuable thing was the written record that would always be there and that people would always study and make use of. Mm-hmm. And therefore, what Nuremberg had to teach would go on in subsequent generations because the record was there. Mm-hmm. The names, including even Bob Jackson's name, would become just a name of some vague identity to maybe members of the bar 2 or 3 generations later. Right. But the record would be there and could be completely recaptured. So that was my feeling. Yeah. And I was, glad that I've been a part of that.
You're living history.
There aren't many left, are there?
Oh, we're going to ask you, do you keep in touch with anybody?
At Drexel's record.
Drexel?
I don't keep in touch with anybody else. I realized from this conversation, but I already knew it, that there were 2 or 3, Whitney Harris that you mentioned, that I felt I would recognize if I saw him on the street, but I never tried to be in touch with him. And Bernie Meltzer the same way. Bernie Meltzer, the only 3 I know to be alive are 4, counting me, are those 4. Mm-hmm. And maybe they are the only ones who were officially trial counsel.
Right. I think you're right. The only one I'm not sure of is Mr. Baldwin. Right. Bill Baldwin.
I don't remember him.
He's on the list.
He's on the list.
Uh,
You say he's,
we don't know.
you don't know?
Drexel will know.
Mhm.
We're gonna see him this afternoon.
Yeah.
Because I
He's a
think
fine-
he's tried to keep touch.
He's a fine guy, and I found him very easy to be in touch with. So he's the guy that I did ultimately come to be in touch with and continued the relationship. Not that we see each other a lot or regularly have lunch or anything like that, but I do hear from him and he does hear from me. And I don't know whether you happen to know it, I don't know why you should, but I publish a newsletter.
Well, ironically, we do know that.
You're on the internet, so I've seen you on the internet.
I see. Well, he found me somehow, and he's on my mailing list. So he's always gotten my, I don't know that he got it from the very beginning. I've been doing it for 10 years. I think this is my 11th year. And I don't know at what point he got to know about it and got on the list. And since that time, because he was getting a monthly letter that he read, he would sometimes be in touch with me about what he was doing.
Sure.
So in that sense, we've
Nice,
kept,
no, it's a nice
kept
way
in touch with
of
each
keeping in
other.
touch. Did you and General Gill stay in touch when you were both back in Westminster?
I saw him several times by accident. We both knew very well who we were and more or less kept in touch with what we were doing.
Right.
Not directly from us, just by, we had this common base.
Right.
My wife for many years was a trustee at Western Maryland College. And of course, knew General Gill extremely well. And she now is a trustee emeritus. We are within 1 week the same age.
I would have never guessed that you're 87 years old.
You wouldn't guess that. She is.
Absolutely not.
She wouldn't guess. You wouldn't guess she is either.
My God.
And we've been, each of us has been married only once. And we were married in 1938, so you can see how long.
Wow.
Wow.
Congratulations.
That has worked out.
I'd say so.
Do you have papers or memorabilia? I mean, like the letters you wrote home to your wife from Nuremberg. Have those survived?
She probably has them. I wrote regular letters. I don't know whether they would be of any interest to you. I don't know how specifically they would cast a light on the Nuremberg process
Right.
and what was going on there.
Right.
It might be more a case of my telling her what I've already told you, what I was doing
Right.
in an abbreviated fashion.
Right. But it might, sharpen up chronology and give a little color and flavor. That kind of stuff can be.
I'm perfectly willing to ask her whether she's got things. She does save things.
Okay.
I think if she couldn't come up with them, it wouldn't be because she threw them out.
Right.
It might well mean she wouldn't know how to find them.
Right. Did you keep any kind of a journal, or
No.
were you corresponding with anybody other than your wife?
No.
Okay. Did you have photographs? Were you a
I never was.
Kodak
I
brownie
had no
guy?
camera.
Okay.
Took no photographs.
Okay.
Does anybody have any photos of you at Nuremberg? Did anybody have any photos of
When
you?
when I came back, I stopped in London, and I went into the Nuremberg legal office, I guess, or the American government's office for Nuremberg in London. I forget the address, down there in the main square where everything is. And they had a publicity officer there who delivered their publicity to the world press on what was going on at Nuremberg and so on. That was his job. I stopped in there. I don't know just why. And he gave me a collection of, I don't know that I could find more than one of them. I have one frame, a collection of newspaper clippings in which I was mentioned. And it was front page in Izvestia, Izvestia,
Oh, wow.
and it was front page of the New York Times. And of course, I was the front character
Yeah.
in the front page story. So he gave me those. And I dare say I could find the one, the Russian one, because it was given to me by somebody from Russia.
That's terrific.
And then the guy in London gave me the one from the New York Times. And but while I was there, he said, "Let me photograph you." So he made a photograph, and I dare say I have a copy of that
Wow, that'd be
someplace. And it would be in my naval uniform, and it would show me to be a young naval officer.
All of this is designed to, if it's at all possible to get copies of this, to have a Brady Bryson file at the Robert Jackson Center would be a thrill for us.
Well, I would try to supply stuff for you,
Yeah.
or copies of stuff.
Yeah.
I don't say there's a great deal,
Yeah.
but I would supply copies of stuff for you, if that'll be helpful.
Oh, that would be great.
Great.
And
I wanted to say to you, because I might forget to say it, and I really think it's important for me to explain to you that I can only do stuff like that. I can do it from where I live. I've reached a point where, while I seem young and healthy, I'm really being told by my family and of course, my medical people that excuse me.
Brady, it's okay. You want to get you something to drink or take a little
No,
break?
it's all right.
Okay. No,
The cause of my difficulty has nothing to do with Nuremberg.
Okay. No,
It has to do with the deaths in my own family, which are very, very emotional things to me, as you can see.
I can only imagine. I do know that you lost a son
Yeah.
who I've read about, who obviously was a tremendous man,
Yeah.
and in a too short life, really
He's
made great contributions.
yeah.
Um,
Well, where was I? I will try to. I want to tell you, I've quit traveling.
right. Right.
So I really
Staying-
wouldn't expect to be able, when you were having some meeting up there with a lot of people,
Right.
sort of come up and, be an ornament of some kind.
Right.
I don't believe I would bring myself to undergo that.
Right.
And I'm instructed not to do it.
Right. No, you need to be.
There's a lot of hassle in travel today. I don't have to tell you.
Right.
And there's no way you can eliminate it.
That's right.
You have to just be resilient enough to take it. And God knows I traveled every place all over the world.
Right.
And I am an experienced traveler, but that tells me I shouldn't do this.
Right.
Because I know what you get into.
I think that's wise. And
I'm glad you have sympathy for that.
yes.
And that's not a reflection of any lack of interest in what you're doing.
No.
In fact, I would like very well to know more about what you're doing. I don't
Right.
know what's the easy way to do that. Whether you've published anything yet, or that describes who you are and what you are,
Sure.
or what you're doing. That would be useful to me.
Well, we'll keep you right up to speed on all that stuff.
Fine.
And you should know that you're in the same position as Mr. Sprecher.
Is that right?
Drexel has similarly said the same thing. Glad to keep involved. I want to talk to you about Nuremberg and Jackson, but I don't travel.
Yeah.
So
Well, we've gone on a long time
Yeah,
here.
no, we should let you.
No, you've been terrific.
Yeah.
You've been terrific.
Well, you know,
Your memory is outstanding, and your participation in this was really, you know, a central piece of the trial. I mean, going to that podium and doing that job was a real contribution.
yeah.
And so hearing you talk about it has been a
Okay,
real
just-
privilege.
Well, is there anything further that you think of that you've overlooked that you particularly wanted to ask me? I don't want to walk out and then have you saying, oh, I forgot
Yeah, I
to
do.
ask.
When the day was done and you completed your piece of the Schacht case, and then in October of 1946, you open up the newspaper and find that he was acquitted. Did you have a reaction to that?
Yeah, I think that was no surprise.
Right.
When I took the job, the case had a reputation locally among the people working there as maybe the most difficult case to win in the whole list.
Right.
And I think Bob Jackson had been told that when he insisted that Schacht be indicted, told that by the British.
Right.
And maybe by the French. And he fought them, and he got the indictment by persuading the French. And but it was, I think, well known, and I wasn't talked about. Everybody went around, of course, saying we're going to lose a case. But it was known that it was not going to be easy going, and that's why Jackson felt he should open it himself. So I knew it was going to be tough going. I didn't leave because of that.
No, no.
I had my own reasons, which I've explained to you. And I would have enjoyed staying on if I felt I could and should. But I was not there when the rest of the case was heard, including the cases against Schacht presented by the Russians, French, and British, nor any of the defense, except a few interruptions I had while I was presenting our opening case by motions or interruptions. That's the only exposure I got to their defense. But I knew enough to realize that it's perfectly possible this will not be won. Somehow that didn't bother me. I felt a decision had been made to indict him, and I don't believe I would have disagreed with that. The decision having been made, we had a duty. Our job was plain and clear, and we had a job to do. And I felt that I had done my job well, and I wasn't at all unhappy having been given the job to do. And the outcome wasn't going to change that. And that record would always be there. I felt, as I told you earlier, that I thought the big name of the game is the record. And I felt we made a record on Mr. Schacht, even though he managed to get acquitted because he couldn't. You could only get 2 judges willing to convict him and 2 unwilling. Nevertheless, nobody can read that record and say, here was an innocent man. You know, he wasn't really held to be innocent. He was held to be just and not convicted.
Right, exactly.
And they're very different things. And a very tight vote, and the Russians dissented. So the record was made in the case of Schacht, and that's what I thought I was there for, and that's what I thought Nuremberg was all about. And the fact that he was acquitted didn't change any of that, which was the real substance as I saw it. And he always believed that he would be acquitted. At least he put up a strong front. And he turned out to be right, but what she secretly believed, I don't know.
Well, I know that Jackson thought he was guilty.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was very upset when that verdict came out.
Yeah. I was not upset because, I had no sense of not having done my part and had done it meeting everybody's hope and expectations.
Sure.
So how could I feel that's a blow in the face, so to speak, to me personally. Uh, and you can explain in terms of the whole case and how it happened. You can explain and realize how it happened. And it's no reflection on anybody, in my opinion. No negative reflection on anybody.
And in an interesting way, the fact that a few of the defendants were acquitted enhances the credibility of the trial.
I've said that to any number of times in just casual discussion with people who learn I was at Nuremberg. And I don't like it to sound like I am apologizing for Schacht's acquittal.
Right.
But I do think that it had to be known this was not a kangaroo court.
Right.
And the court had to prove that.
Right.
And they set a high standard for conviction.
Right.
And it was a wise thing to do.
Absolutely.
That does strengthen the record tremendously.
Yes. Yeah. No, I agree.
So your point is extremely well taken.
I began this just as a lawyer, a law student, reading about Nuremberg, the trial, because 3 guys walked out the door of the courtroom at the end.
Right.
That says something about what you put together.
This has been terrific.
Yeah.